Yeshaya. It is now our distinct privilege to hear from our guest speaker. And I said this on Shabbos and Shul, and I think that he's a Rav and a person who needs no introduction. With the advent of technology, I believe that there's not a person in this room who has not heard of Rabbi Glatstein and who has not benefited from his Shiurim, from his Svarim, from his lectures, and he has achieved great renown internationally as a tremendous Chacham, as a Rav, of course, in the 5 towns, as an Arvid Torah and a Chavis Svarim, and it is our privilege and honor to hear from Rabbi Glatstein.
Shai Fisher, the Rabbi Fisher.
Thank you very much, Reb Shaya, for the kind introduction. So there's a Yid who comes over from Europe. The problem is in Europe he was a nobody. Nobody was machshav him. Nobody valued him. Relative to other Yidden over there, he really did not stand out. But he made up his mind when he would come to America, he would really be a somebody. So he comes to America, he buys himself nice begadim, chashav a hat, and he's waiting for his moment to shine. Comes to Kriyas HaTorah, and the Gabbai says, Kohen, is there a Kohen, anyone? This Yid said he always wanted to be a Kohen, now's his chance. He said, yeah, I'm a Kohen. So he walks up to get the first aliyah, he makes the bracha al HaTorah, and then as the minhag in America is, he goes over to the Rav to give a shkoyach. The Rav looks at him, he says, Zundel, you're a Kohen? I still remember your tata. He was a Yisrael. I remember your Zayda. You're not a Kohen. He says, Rav, if you could be a rabbi in America, I could be a Kohen. You know, sometimes in some shuls, you say he's a rabbi in America. But in this shul, you're zoicha to have a Rav at your helm, a Yid. He learned b'chavrusa with the Lakewood Rosh Hashiva, with the Rosh Hashiva of Yitzhak Fegelstack, with Reb Moshe Shimon Shapiro b'chavrusa. This is what kind of Rabbanim you have over here at the helm for decades and decades. That's why the shul has had, Baruch Hashem, the lifespan and the arichas yomim and the vitality of so many decades. So Mavarech, the Rav and the whole Mishpacha, they should continue Gesundheit to lead this Gehila to even greater heights. Ad bias goyel tzedek m'her v'yomeinu amen. Friends, you all know the story. You all know the story of the Megillah. I think we had the opportunity to speak a little bit about it 2 years ago. There's a lot of drama in the story, and the nigun, the tune of the Megillah, aids the drama. You know, the way I was taught to read the Megillah. You know, a little Yom Naram nigun. As if like this is the turning point. Everybody knows that's the turning point of the story. Achashverosh can't sleep at night. He thinks in his mind there must be somebody that he has to reward, but the person doesn't want to tell him that somebody wants to kill him, so he figures, how's he going to reward this guy? And just then Haman comes into the Chatzar HaMelech, and Achashverosh tells Haman, you know, what should I do to somebody that I want to honor? And Haman thinks Achashverosh is talking about him. So Haman says he should ride the royal horse and wear the royal crown. And Achashverosh says, exactly, that's a great idea. Do it to Mordechai. And everybody knows the imagery of Haman leading Mordechai through the streets of Shushan. And everybody thinks this is like the turning point of the story, all the drama. And everybody knows the story, how Haman's daughter is looking down from the rooftop, and she takes the chamber pot. What a chamber pot is, the Hameven Yavin. And she takes the chamber pot, and she dumps it on his head. He looks up, he sees his daughter, and she jumps off the roof, and all the lamdos, Avel the Chaflei Rosh. And everybody thinks, okay, the story has turned. This is a big moment in the Purim story. You ever think about it, that this is an irrelevant moment in the Purim story? It has nothing to do with the miracle of Purim. It did not contribute in any way to the salvation of the Jewish people. Because what does the pasuk say? Vayashav Mordechai o Shar HaMelech. Mordechai returns to the gate. He's still putting on his sak ve'efer, and he's still mourning the fact that in a year's time, the Jewish people are going to be annihilated. So it's very nice that he had one day in the sun, and he had the attention, and he had the glory. But in no way did this contribute to the salvation of Purim. You ever think about that question? Why is this information even in the Megillah in the first place? You know, so some people say, well, the momentum began to turn. What is this, a football game? You know, your team is up by 14 points, and you have the ball, and then you fumble, and now the tide turns. This is not a football game. This is hashgacha pratis. How is it relevant that Mordechai had one day in the sun if he's returning Avel v'chafoy roish to the Shar HaMelech? So there's this guy, Hassan Nasralla. The Israelis were after him for 30 years. They tried to kill him dozens of times. He was a smart guy. He was always one step ahead. They were never able to get him. But what happened? Recently, they dropped a bomb on his underground bunker, and they got him like that, a piece of cake. What happened? For 30 years, the man is always one step ahead of the IDF. And then they got him in a cinch. And the answer is one of the most incredible feats in the history of the state of Israel. September 17th, 2024, thousands of pagers used by Hezbollah across Lebanon suddenly exploded, killing dozens of operatives and maiming thousands. So they interviewed Nasralla's children. Nasralla's daughter, Zainab Nasralla, what a beautiful name, said that she called her mother the day after the beeper explosions to find out how the tata was. My mother said he was crying the whole night. His son, Mohammed Jawad Nasralla, said his father sank into a serious depression immediately after the beeper attacks. He was not there anymore. He was no longer present. So for 30 years they couldn't get the man. But as soon as he had depression, they got him in a cinch. 10 days later, they dropped a bomb on his underground bunker, and he was dead like a doorknob. What happened to Nasralla? He was sad, he was depressed, and he was no longer working, firing on all cylinders. Some people attribute the following interpretation of the Megillah to the Vilna Gaon. You could look there whether he is or is not saying that. But when I read this story about Nasralla, that's what happened to Haman. I have a question for you. So Haman takes one little misstep with Esther. V'Haman noifel al hamit asher Esther aleh. And Achashverosh comes back, and Achashverosh is fuming. You're telling me that this smooth-talking politician could not talk his way out of the situation? You ever see them interview these politicians? They ask them a question point blank, and they sit there and they spin a maisa, the most convincing Baba maisa you ever heard. They don't even answer the question, and people walk away like some ga'oinus was revealed. Haman had nothing to say. Haman had nothing to do. Haman couldn't talk his way out of the situation. What happened to the man? This man was able to manipulate to the second highest ranking position in the whole world. And all of a sudden, he's speechless? V'Haman chafoy? He has nothing to say? What happened to him? The Gross says something to the effect. He had such a bad day that day. It was so demoralizing for him. He was so depressed. He was so down. He wasn't firing on all cylinders. Balayla hahu nadada shnas hamelech was the turning point in the story. What happened to Haman? Was he hurt? Was he killed? He was saddened. His mood was affected. He was depressed. And depression is the beginning of the end. But we could say conversely as well. You know, we have these 2 months of the year. We have the month of Adar and we have the month of Nisan. And the Gemara says, Mismach ge'ula le'ge'ula. We juxtapose two salvations. You see, we have a tradition that the Beis Hamikdash will be built on the first day of Pesach. But if you want geula, first you need a month of simcha. You need to improve your mood, you need to improve your happiness, you need to improve your perspective, and then we're ready for the Yeshua in the month of Nisan. I want to share with you an amazing Balaturim, an untapped Balaturim, Parshas Tetzaveh. This Balaturim is a Pesach Gadol to understand Megillas Esther. Balaturim points out 3 times in Tanakh you have the following word, V'nishma, V'nishma. One in this week's Parsha, V'nishma koiloi b'vaya el HaKodesh. One in Mishpatim, Naaseh, V'nishma. And one in Megillas Esther, V'nishma piskam hamelech asher yaseh. V'nishma piskam hamelech b'chol malchusai. Ki rabahi. Says the Balaturim, these 3 mentions of the word V'nishma are teaching me 3 halachos mentioned in Masechta Megillah. The Gemara says, Mevatlen Talmud Torah uba'in l'shmaya mikra Megillah. If you have a choice, should you hear the Megillah or should you learn Torah? We're Mevatel Talmud Torah and we come to hear the Megillah. You know where we learn this from? It says Nasa V'nishma Torah. It says V'nishma Piskam HaMelech Megillah. Which one do you do? V'nishma Piskam HaMelech Ki Rabbahi. Megillah's Rabbah. Megillah's greater. Then the Balaturim continues. What if you're in the middle of doing the Avodah? V'nishma Koiloi B'vay El HaKodesh. Or you could read the Megillah. V'nishma Piskam HaMelech. What do? V'nishma Piskam HaMelech Ki Rabbahi. The Megillah is greater. But if you think carefully about this Balaturim, we all know we're Mevatel Torah to hear the Megillah. We all know we're Mevatel the Avodah to hear the Megillah. But would you say Ki Rabbahi? Would you say the Megillah is greater? It's not greater. Is it greater? Is it Adif? The Balaturim says it's Adif. It's not Adif. We're Mevatel any mitzvah to be Mekayim a mitzvah Iveres. We're Mevatel Torah to be Mekayim any mitzvah. We're Mevatel Avodah to be Mekayim any mitzvah. But why would we say Ki Rabbahi? By the way, the Balaturim says Ki Rabbahi, the Baal HaMemra in the Gemara is Rabbah. Ki Rabbahi, that's Shitas Rabbah. By the way, our Gersa in the Gemara is Rava. Okay. But what does the Balaturim mean, Ki Rabbahi? That Mikra Megillah is greater? Let's digress ever so slightly to talk about Alamda Shakasha. The Gemara says, Mevatlin Talmud Torah uban l'shmaya mikra Megillah. We're Mevatel Torah to hear the Megillah. All the Achroinim ask, many of the Sifrei Lamdas ask, what do you mean Mevatlin Talmud Torah? You're Mevatel Torah to hear the Megillah? What, Megillah is not Torah? Megillah is one of the Chavdalet Svarim. Why would you call it Bittul Torah? It's not Bittul Torah to stop learning Gemara and to learn Nevi'im or Ksuvim. That's Bittul Torah. Why does the Gemara say Mevadlin? The Gemara should say that we read the Megillah even if you're in the middle of learning, but the last thing it is Bittul Torah. So there are a lot of very interesting answers to this question. From each answer you could learn a very important yesod. For example, the Aruch HaShulchan writes that indeed reading the Megillah is Talmud Torah, but until everybody settles down and the rabbi finishes all the announcements of whether you bang, you don't bang, how many times you bang, those few counted moments of downtime, that's Bittul Torah. So the Gemara says, Mevatlen Talmud Torah ubayan l'shmaya mikra Megillah, from which we learn a great principle that Bittul Torah doesn't mean an hour or 20 minutes or 5 minutes. Even moments of time, of unutilized time is Bittul Torah. Rav Shlomo Kluger in Sefer HaChaim offers a famous yesod that's mentioned in the Olam HaYeshivas, even though nobody knows where it's from exactly. It's from Rav Shlomo Kluger. Shlomo Kluger says in the Sefer HaChaim that the main element of Talmud Torah is the toil, is the amelos, is the yegiyah you put in learning. The analytical probing and to try to understand. So if somebody interrupts an analytical, in-depth learning to just read the Megillah just like a story, this is what we call in the Olam HaYeshivas, it's Bittul Torah be'echos. There's Bittul Torah be'kamos. You know, if you have 12 hours to learn and you learn 3 hours, you're mevatel 9 hours bekamos. But then there's bittul Torah in quality. If you could have been learning on a deeper level, if you could have been learning with more toil, with more effort, that's also a form of bittul Torah. There's another chiddush of Rabbi Shlomo Kluger, maybe we'll save it for a different time. Rabbi Ephraim Zalman Margolis has a famous chiddush, an amazing chiddush. Rabbi Ephraim Zalman Margolis writes in his Shuvas that Esther petitioned the Chachamim kisvuni l'doros. Esther wanted her book canonized, that it should be entered as one of the Chaf Dalet Sfarim. And there's a question in the Gemara, there's a machlokes between Shmuel and Rabbi Eliezer, whether the Chachamim acceded to the request of Esther. Says Rabbi Ephraim Zalman Margolis, Shmuel in the Gemara says, no, they said no. It's not part of the Chaf Dalet Sfarim. Says Rabbi Ephraim Zalman Margolis, even though we don't paskin like Shmuel, we paskin like Rabbi Eliezer, and Esther is canonized, Esther is part of the Chaf Dalet Sfarim, listen to this, it's only considered part of the Chaf Dalet Sfarim to read it on Purim for Mikra Megillah, but it's not part of the Chaf Dalet Sfarim legabe Talmud Torah. Perhaps, according to Rabbi Ephraim Zalman Margolis, this would explain an unusual phenomenon the Gemara Megillah talks about on Yud Amud Beis, Yud Aleph Amud Aleph, that when the Amorim would give Shir on Masechta Megillah, they were Pasach lo Pischa lahai Parshasa mehacha. They would start giving the Shir from Divrei Hayamim, or from Shmuel, or from a Pasuk in Chumash. I don't understand. Is the Megillah not rich enough that you could give a shir straight on the psukim of the Megillah? You need to give a shir from left field and then bring it back to the subject of the Megillah? But according to Rabbi Ephraim Zalman Margolis, perhaps, to give a shir directly on Megillas Esther, it would not be Talmud Torah, because Megillah was never entered into the Chaf Dalet Sfarim to be Torah. In order for the shir to be considered Torah, they had to give a shir elsewhere, on Divrei Hayamim or something else, and bring it back into Megillas Esther to be machnis it into the regular scheduled Talmud Torah. The Avnei Nezer famously, in a tshuva, Siman Tav Kuf Yud Zayin, brings that he does not believe that this pshat emanated from the mouth of Rabbi Ephraim Zalman Margolis. How could such a thing be, that the subject of the Megillah is not considered Talmud Torah? So then what? Masechta Megillah is not Talmud Torah, and all the Midrashim on Esther is not Talmud Torah? How could such a thing be? Says the Avnei Nezer, Megillah is Torah like any of the books of Tanakh, like any part of the Torah, and every Talmud Chacham needs to know it. But you know what the Chassam Sofer says? Chassam Sofer writes, why is it that we're mevatel Talmud Torah and we're ban l'shmaya mikra Megillah? You know what the Chassam Sofer writes in a drasha? Something that el malei amrai yev shel amrai. If the Chassam Sofer did not say this, it would be impossible to say. The Chassam Sofer writes, she'or kadosh hakolol b'Megillah. The holy light that is encompassed in Megillas Esther, hu mamish yoiser gadol v'nichbad mitorasenu hakadosha ba'atzma. The light in Megillas Esther is kemat greater than the light of the Torah itself. If the Chassam Sofer would not have written those words, who could have even thought such a thing? Chassam Sofer writes, the light of Megillas Esther is greater than the light of the Torah itself. How do we understand that? What's the meaning of that? A few years ago, on Yud Aleph Adar, I had the zchus to be at the original resting place of the Chidah. I'm a big fan of the Chidah. The Chidah originally was buried in Livorno, and he was later moved. He's now buried on Har Menuchos. I wanted to go to the original kever of the Chidah. The kever remains in Livorno on the day he was buried, Yud Aleph Adar. Fine. So you say I was getting too close to Purim. No. It was Adar Aleph. So I had plenty of time. In Livorno, on the line where the Chidah was buried, is a who's who of all time Gedolei Olam. Many people don't know who's buried over there. You had the Yad Malachi. You ever hear of Yad Malachi? It's one of the Sfarim of Klali Hashas. You have over there Rabbi Yehuda Saraf, who is a Rebbe of the Pri Chadash. And you have an amazing kever there. Many are not familiar with this individual. His name is Rabbi Aryeh HaKohen. Rabbi Aryeh HaKohen wrote a sefer on Shulchan Aruch, Al Pi Kabbalah, called Tur Barekes. You ever hear of the sefer? Tur Barekes. Tur Barekes is a sefer on Shulchan Aruch, Al Pi Kabbalah. The Belzer Rebbe was a very big advocate of the sefer Tur Barekes. It's an incredible sefer. He's buried right there. In Sefer Tur Barekes, he's one of the Gurei Ho'ari, Talmidei Arizal, he says a davar nifla ma'od. Quotes a medrash. The medrash says there are certain things in this world that are noivlois. What's a noivel? A noivel means a semblance of the real thing. So the medrash says a chaloim is a noivel of nevuah. A dream is a semblance of prophecy. Sleep is a semblance of death. That's why people say they're not afraid of death. Sleep is so geschmack, you know. Honey is a semblance of the man. And then the Medrash says something very astonishing. The Medrash says the Torah is a semblance of Chachma Ha'elyaina. The Torah, you see, we're accustomed to thinking the highest level of Chachma is the Torah. No, the Medrash says the Torah is a me'ain, is like a 60th of the Chachma Elyaina. That itself, that's the words of the Medrash Rabbah. The Torah is a semblance, is a noivel of Chachma Elyaina. So then, you know, it would be interesting to try to probe, what is the Chachma Elyaina? Is there anything that we have that is the Chachma Elyaina? I mean, we have the Torah, we have Shas, we have Mishnah, we have Chumash, that's the Torah. But what's the Chachma Elyaina? The Tur Barekes is Megillah. There's only one element of Torah that is the raw Chachma Elyaina that the Torah is a semblance of. By the way, the meaning is that the Torah is not the Das of Hashem. The Torah is how Hashem filtered a certain Chachma so that we, Basar Adam, could understand HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But there is a certain Chachma Elyaina that's pre the filter, pre it being assimilated in a way that we can understand it. Says the Tur Barekes, you know what the Chachma Elyaina is? There's one thing the Rebbeinu Shalom gave Klal Yisrael that is pure Chachma Elyaina. Megillas Esther. Megillas Esther is the Chachma Elyaina itself, of which the Torah is a noivel of that. Rav Pinchas Friedman brings in his sefer that according to the Tur Barekes, the words of the Chassam Sofer should be understood literally. That the light of Megillas Esther is literally greater than the light of the Torah itself. You know, there's certain things, you look at the Megillah, you will find open prophecies that you will not find anywhere else in the Torah. Everybody knows, the famous Tafshin Zayin, the dates of the Nuremberg trial, where you have a remez to the 10 Nazis that were hung and the exact date of their hanging. Do you have anywhere else in the whole Torah a prophecy so blatant where it writes something that would happen 2,000 years later to the exact date? You don't have such raw revelation of divine orchestration. Only Megillas Esther. The light of the Megillah, says Chassam Sofer, is greater than the light of the Torah itself. Where does this come from? This is straight up the words of the Arizal. The Arizal says, "On v'mei hapurim ha'ela, la yavru mitoich ha'Yehudim." Says the Ari, the light of Purim, the oira of Purim, may oilam lo niyasa kamayu. There was never such a light in the history of the world. Not Pesach, not Sukkot, not Shavuos, not any other Yom Tif. The great light of Hashgacha Pratis that came down to the world on the time of Purim, which, by the way, the Chidah says it's a light which is chayzer v'niyar. I'll just throw out. Very interesting. You know, the Chidah writes in at least 6 Svarim that the Gzeira of Achashverosh was only on Ashkenazim, was not on Sfardim. Chidah writes in 6 Svarim that when Chazal say he ruled Mehoidu v'Yad Kush, 127 Medinos, he never ruled over Eretz Sfarad. The Sfardim were never in danger. By the way, somewhat parallel to what we find with Hitler. It's a very striking parallel. So the Chidah is bothered. So why do Sfardim observe Purim? You know, the Chida writes this question in 6 of his Svarim. Why do Svardim observe Purim? And the Chida says they don't observe Purim because their lives were saved. They observe Purim because what the Arizal says, that the great light of the salvation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that came down on Purim is an annual light. It's Chayzer v'nei Neyar. The Chida coins an expression, Chayzer v'nei Oyer, with an aleph. The light is a resurfacing light that comes every year. It's a light that was not a one-time occurrence. And all the Yeshuas and all the divine revelation that occurred 2,000 years ago, we can access annually, Be'ezus Hashem, this year, like we say, Bayom Mahim Uvazman Hazeh. So Be'ezus Hashem, we're looking forward in a couple of days when we read Megillas Esther. We have to realize that this is a Kabbalah HaTorah in a certain sense that surpasses the Torah itself, if we could even say such a thing, but that's what the Chassam Sofer says. And that means the Yeshua that we could access on Purim. Yeshuas, everybody needs Yeshuas in their personal lives, in their families, and for Klal Yisrael, we should be Zoicha. Then the Yom Tov of Purim is tag teaming this year with Shabbos. It's a Purim Meshulash. It's a Yeshua that is Muchzekes for Klal Yisrael this year. We should be Zoicha to access this great light. We should be Zoicha to access the great Yeshua that comes down for Klal Yisrael. And Be'ezus Hashem, my humble bracha for the whole Kehillah is you should be together, Gesund to hate, Yeshuas v'nachamos, for all your families, Ad B'Yaskal Tzedek Meher V'Yaminu, Amen.
Square.